A 6-year-old stood on a stranger's porch at dawn, set down a ceramic pig that held everything he owned, and walked back to the curb to wait. Inside that pig was $11.40 in coins, a folded note written in pencil, and the whole of one small boy's plan to save his mother. He did not know the man who lived in that house. He knew only what he had seen through a chain-link fence 3 weeks earlier, and what his mother had said in the dark when she thought he was asleep. Marcus Bell did not yet know any of this. He was asleep on the second floor of a narrow house on Delaney Street, off shift after 16 hours, and the soft clink of coins on his porch boards did not wake him. What he would find when he opened his door, and what it would set loose, neither the boy nor the firefighter could have guessed. Stay with this one, because the smallest banks sometimes hold the largest debts, and this debt had been waiting 11 years to be paid. The boy's name was Eli. He was small for 6, with a gap where a front tooth had been, and a winter coat a size too big because his mother had bought it to grow into. He had carried the pig 9 blocks. It was heavy, and twice he had to stop and set it on a wall and shake the ache out of his arms. He had left the apartment before his mother woke, because he knew she would not let him go, and he had a plan. And the plan required that nobody stop him until the pig was on the porch, and the note was inside, and the thing was done. He sat on the curb across the street and watched the dark house and waited for a light to come on. He had decided he would not leave until he knew the man had found it. The light came on a little after 7. Marcus came down his stairs in a grey t-shirt and sweatpants, still half inside the heavy fog of a long shift, and he opened his front door to bring in the paper and nearly stepped on a pink ceramic pig sitting square in the middle of his welcome mat. He stopped. He looked up and down the street. He saw a boy on the curb across the way, a small boy in a too big coat, watching him with the still, serious attention of a child who is waiting to see whether his plan will work. Marcus picked up the pig. It was heavy. Something inside it shifted and rang. He turned it over and found a rubber stopper in its belly, and when he worked the stopper loose, coins spilled into his palm, dimes and nickels and pennies and 3 crumpled single bills, and a small square of paper folded so many times it had gone soft. He unfolded it on his front step while the boy watched. The handwriting was a child's, careful and large, the letters fighting to stay on the line. It said that this was all the money he had. It said his mum was sick, and the doctors needed more money than they had, and he had heard her crying about it. It said he was sorry it was not enough. And at the bottom, in letters pressed so hard the pencil had nearly torn the paper, it said, "Please save her like you save people from fires, because I do not know who else to ask." Marcus read it twice. Then he looked across the street at the boy, and the boy stood up off the curb, and for a long moment, the firefighter and the child just looked at each other in the grey morning light. 2 strangers held together by $11, and a sentence a 6-year-old should never have had to write. What Marcus did not know, standing there on his cold porch, was that he had met this family before. He had met them on the worst night of his life, 11 years ago, and he had spent every year since trying to forget it. He crossed the street. He crouched down so he was level with the boy. The pig cradled in one arm, and he asked the boy his name, and the boy said Eli. And Marcus asked where his mother was, and Eli pointed back the way he had come and said she was at home, and she did not know he had left. Marcus asked why he had brought the pig here, to this house, to him. And Eli said because he had seen him. 3 weeks ago, through the fence at the fire station on Crail Avenue, Eli had watched the firefighters wash the truck, and he had seen the big one with the kind face lift a smaller kid up to sit in the driver's seat and honk the horn, and Eli had decided, with the absolute logic of a child, that a man who saved people for a living and who was gentle with children was the man you brought your problem to when the problem was too big for anyone you knew. He had asked another kid at the fence the man's name. The kid said everyone called him Big Marcus. So Eli had found out which house was his by following the truck one evening, and he had counted his money, and he had written his note, and he had come. Marcus felt something go tight and strange in his chest. He told Eli he would help. He did not yet know how. He only knew, looking at that small face, that he was not going to hand the pig back and close his door. He walked Eli home. The walk was 9 blocks through a neighborhood Marcus knew well, past the corner store with the bars on the windows, past the church with the cracked steps, past the bus stop where 3 people stood in the cold waiting for a bus that came every 40 minutes if it came at all. Eli talked the whole way. He told Marcus that his mom worked at the hospital, not as a doctor. She cleaned the rooms, she had the night shift, and she was tired all the time, but she always made him breakfast and she never let him see her cry, except she did not know that the walls in their apartment were thin and he heard everything. He told Marcus his mom's name was Renee, and Marcus stopped walking. He stopped right there on the sidewalk, and a cold went through him that had nothing to do with the morning. He asked the boy carefully what his mother's last name was. Eli said it was the same as his. Carter. Renee Carter. Marcus had not heard that name spoken aloud in 11 years, but he had never once stopped hearing it inside his own head. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building with a broken elevator and a stairwell that smelled of other people's dinners. Renee Carter opened the door already frightened, because her son was gone and his bed was empty, and she had been about to call the police, and then she saw him, safe, standing beside a large stranger holding a pink ceramic pig, and her fear turned sideways into confusion. She pulled Eli inside and held him and looked up at the man in her doorway, and Marcus watched her face. And he saw the moment she did not recognize him. Why would she? 11 years is a long time. And the last time she had seen him, he had been wearing a mask and turnout gear, and the worst hour of her life had been happening around them both. She did not know his face, but Marcus knew hers. He had carried it 11 years. Renee asked what had happened, and Eli, before Marcus could speak, confessed the whole plan in a rush, the pig and the note and the porch and the 9 blocks, and Renee's face moved through alarm, and then something else as she understood what her son had done and why. She had not known he heard her crying. She had been so careful. She turned to Marcus to apologize, to thank him, to take the pig and send the stranger on his way before her son's wild idea cost this kind man any more of his morning. And Marcus said he would like to come in, if that was all right, because there was something she needed to know, and it was going to take longer than a doorway. Let me say here, before the story goes on, that some kindnesses do not get repaid for years, and that the world keeps a longer memory than we do. Hold on to that. Renee made coffee because she did not know what else to do with her hands. The apartment was small and clean and scrubbed past its age. The way a place gets when the person living in it has nothing but their own labor to make it decent. There was a sofa with a folded blanket, a card table with 2 chairs, a wall of Eli's drawings taped up with care. On the counter sat a stack of envelopes, and Marcus did not have to read them to know what they were. Because he had seen that exact stack in 100 kitchens, the pile of medical bills that grows like something alive. Renee saw him look and turned the stack face down, an old gesture of dignity, and Marcus pretended he had not seen. He sat at the card table. Eli sat beside him, still in his too big coat, watching the grown-ups with the wariness of a child who has just done a big thing and is waiting to learn if he is in trouble. Marcus told Renee that her son had done a brave thing and a good thing, and that he was not in any trouble at all. And then Marcus asked her gently if she was sick. Renee did not want to answer. She glanced at Eli, and Marcus understood. He asked Eli if he wanted to see something. And from his pocket he took the small steel ring of keys he carried everywhere, with a tiny brass fire helmet on it the size of a thumbnail. And he gave it to the boy and asked him to find out how many keys were on it and count them twice to be sure. Eli took the job seriously and bent over the keys, and over his bent head the 2 adults could speak. Renee said it was her kidneys. Both of them failing slowly, the way the doctor had explained it, a thing that had been coming for years and had finally arrived. She was on a list. She needed a transplant. Until then it was dialysis 3 times a week, 4 hours a session, and the machine kept her alive, but it could not keep her working, and she had already dropped from full-time to part-time at the hospital because she could not stand the whole shift anymore, and part-time did not cover the apartment and the dialysis copays and the medicine and a growing boy. And that was the crying Eli had heard, the arithmetic that did not work no matter how many times she ran it. She said all of this in a low, flat voice, the voice of someone who has explained a catastrophe so many times it has worn smooth. Marcus listened. And when she was done, he was quiet for a moment, and then he asked her if the name Crail Avenue meant anything to her. Renee went still. Crail Avenue was where she had lived 11 years ago. Crail Avenue was the address of the building that had burned. She looked at the stranger at her card table with new eyes, and the coffee went cold between them, and her voice, when it came, was barely there. She asked how he knew that. Marcus set both hands flat on the table. He told her that 11 years ago he had been a probationary firefighter, 2 months on the job, riding the back of an engine out of the Crail Avenue house, and that the first structure fire he ever went into as a working firefighter was a third-floor apartment in a building on that street, a fight that started in a downstairs unit and climbed the walls in the night. He told her that the crews got everyone out but one, that there was a woman trapped in a back bedroom with her baby, and that he had been the one who went down the hall when the lieutenant said it was too far gone, the one who found them, the woman on the floor with her body curled around the child to keep the smoke off him. Both of them so still he thought he was too late. He told her he had carried them out, the baby inside his coat against his chest, the woman over his shoulder, down a stairwell that was already failing, and that they had both lived. And he told her that he had never known their names, because by the time he came out of the building the ambulances had taken them, and the next day he was moved to a different house across the city. And in 11 years on the job, he had told himself it was better not to go. Looking because you cannot carry every face, and the ones you carry out you have to set down, or you will not be able to lift the next one. He looked at the boy bent over the brass helmet keychain, and he said the baby he carried out inside his coat had been wearing a yellow sleeper with a duck on the front. Renee made a sound. Her hand went to her mouth. Eli looked up from the keys, sensing the change in the room, and asked if he had counted right. And Renee said, "Yes, baby, you counted right," in a voice that was coming apart, and she pulled him onto him, and looked at Marcus over the top of his head with 11 years collapsing in her eyes. Because she had kept that yellow sleeper, it was in a box under her bed, the duck worn nearly off it. The only thing of Eli's babyhood she had carried out of that fire, and she had never known the name of the man who had gone back down the hall for them when a wiser man would have stayed at the door. The story should pause here, because something is opening, and you can feel it the way you feel weather change before it arrives. The man who had saved this boy from a fire when he was a baby was sitting at the boy's kitchen table 11 years later because the boy had brought him a piggy bank and asked him to save his mother. Renee could not stop crying and could not explain to Eli why, and Eli decided the keys had upset her and apologized for them, which made her laugh through the crying, a wet, broken laugh, and she told him no, the keys were perfect, he had done everything perfectly. Marcus had to look away for a moment. He had spent 11 years training himself not to wonder what happened to the woman and the baby in the yellow sleeper. He had not let himself imagine them growing up, growing older, because that way lay a kind of attachment the job could not afford. And now here they were. The baby was a boy named Eli, who carried a piggy bank 9 blocks to save his mother, and the woman was sick. And the world that he had handed her back to had spent 11 years grinding her down, 2 jobs, and then 1 job, and then half a job, the apartment, the bills face down on the counter, the dialysis chair 3 times a week, and the slow, terrible math of a body failing while a child watches. Marcus had pulled them out of one fire. He understood, sitting at that table, that they had walked straight into a slower one, and that this time there was no lieutenant to call it, no truck, no hose, just the bills and the list and the time running out. He did not say any of this. What he said was that he wanted to help, that he was able to help, and that he needed Renee to let him. Renee, who had spent 11 years learning to take nothing she had not earned, started to refuse out of pure reflex, and Marcus stopped her with one sentence. He said he had carried her once already, and it had not been a burden then, and it would not be one now. And something in Renee, some wall she'd been holding up alone for a very long time, came down. What Marcus did when he left that apartment, He did quietly, the way he did everything. He did not make speeches. He went back to the firehouse on Delaney, and he sat with what he knew, and over the next days he began to move. He learned the things he needed to learn, because a fire is a problem you solve by knowing the building. And this was a fire too. And the building was the system that was crushing Renee Carter, and Marcus set out to learn its halls. He found out what dialysis cost and what the copays were, and which fund at the hospital existed to help patients who could not pay. The fund Renee had been too proud to ask about and too tired to fill out the forms for. He found out where she was on the transplant list and what the barriers were, and the largest barrier, the one that sat under all the others, was that a person on dialysis 3 times a week cannot hold a job that pays enough to live. And a person who cannot live cannot stay healthy enough to receive a transplant when the call comes. It was a trap built in a circle. Marcus had spent his life walking into burning buildings to break circles like that, where every exit had fire across it and someone had to make a new way out. He started making one. He talked to his crew. He had been at the Delaney house 11 years, and the men and women he worked with would have walked into anything behind him. And when he told them, plainly, without drama, that the baby he pulled out of the Crail Avenue fire 11 years ago had just turned up on his porch with a piggy bank, and that the mother was dying slow for lack of money, in a city full of it, the firehouse did what firehouses do. They organized. It started small. A jar on the counter at the Delaney house, a coffee can really, with a strip of masking tape on the side where someone had written what it was for. By the end of the first shift, it held $40, and the loose change a firehouse generates between runs. Then one of the engineers, a woman named Tasha, who ran every fundraiser the local ever held, took it over and made it real. Tasha did not do anything by halves. She had a binder, she had a phone full of numbers for every union hall and church basement and restaurant supplier in 3 districts, and within a week she had booked the hall and talked a wholesaler into donating the pasta and the sauce at cost, and then waiving the cost entirely, once she told him what it was for. There was a spaghetti dinner at the Union Hall on a Saturday in February, and the turnout was more than anyone expected. Firefighters off 3 houses and their families, and half the neighborhood, paper plates and folding tables and a line out the door into the cold. Eli sat at the front table in a clip-on tie. Tasha had bought him and took the job of thanking people very seriously, shaking hands he could barely reach, and the room loved him for it. Renee sat beside him, tired from a dialysis session 2 days earlier, but upright and dignified in a way that made the firefighters quiet when she passed, because they all knew now what she was carrying and how long she had carried it alone. The dinner cleared more than $4,000 in one night. The local newspaper sent a reporter because a firefighter reunited with the baby he saved is the kind of story a city wants to read on a hard week, and the reporter stayed 3 hours and filled a notebook. But Marcus asked the reporter to hold one piece back. He did not want the piggy bank in the paper yet. He had a reason, and the reason was Eli, and he was saving it. Across town, in a glass office that looked down on the whole grid of the city, a man named Curtis read the newspaper story, with his coffee going cold the way. Renee's had. Curtis ran a foundation. His family had money, old money, the kind that builds wings on hospitals and puts its name on them. And Curtis had spent the back half of his life trying to spend that money in ways that meant something, which is harder than it sounds and lonelier than people think. He read about the firefighter and the baby in the yellow sleeper, and he read the part about the mother on dialysis and the transplant list and the circle she could not break, and Curtis, who had buried his own mother after a long illness and knew exactly the shape of that arithmetic, set down his coffee and told his assistant to find out everything about Renee Carter. What Curtis did not know yet, what nobody had printed, was the part Marcus was holding back. Marcus had not told the reporter about the note inside the pig. He had not told anyone outside that kitchen what the boy had written, because it was the boy's, and a 6-year-old's plea pressed into paper with a pencil until it nearly tore was not a thing to hand to strangers. He kept the note in his locker at the firehouse, folded the way Eli had folded it, and once or twice a shift he would open his locker and see it there, and remember why he was doing all of this. He visited the Carters twice a week now. He fixed the broken elevator complaint with the building, leaning on a landlord who suddenly found the part he had claimed for 2 years he could not get. He drove Renee to dialysis when her appointments fell on his days off, and he sat with Eli in the waiting room and taught him card games and let him wear the brass helmet keychain, and the boy began to call him Big Marcus the way the station kids did. And something in Marcus that had been closed for 11 years came open and stayed open. The money helped. The spaghetti dinner and the jar and the union local cleared enough to get Renee current on the copays and to take the bills off the counter for the first time in 2 years. But Marcus knew money was not the cure. Money bought time. What Renee needed was the transplant, and you cannot fundraise a kidney. He knew that. He carried it. And then the thing happened that he had been quietly, privately, telling no one he had been doing. Marcus had gone 3 weeks earlier on his own, without telling Renee, to a clinic across the city, and he had asked to be tested. The clinic was in a low brick building with a parking lot that flooded when it rained, and he sat in the waiting room in his off-duty clothes, feeling enormous in a small plastic chair, surrounded by people half his size and twice his worry. He filled out the forms under fluorescent light, his big hands cramped around the small pen, the kind of pen chained to a clipboard, and the forms asked questions a person does not usually have to answer about themselves, his blood type and his history, and the names of relatives who had been sick. A coordinator named Joy called him back, a small woman with reading glasses pushed up into grey hair, and she went through the questions again in a soft voice, and she gave him a rack of vials to fill with his blood, and she asked him, near the end, why he was doing this, because she had to, because the rules required her to be sure no one was being paid or pressured. And Marcus told her a thing he had not told anyone, which was that he believed he owed this woman a debt that money could not touch, and that he had carried her once out of a fire, and had spent 11 years not knowing if it mattered, and he wanted to know if his body could pay what the rest of him could not. Joy took her glasses off and looked at him for a moment over the rack of vials, and then she wrote something on his chart and told him they would call. The call came on a Tuesday. He was at the station, between runs, and he stepped out into the apparatus bay to take it where the engine could half hide him, and the coordinator told him the results. He was a match. Not a perfect match, the coordinator said, but a strong one. Strong enough to proceed, strong enough that if he was willing, and if he passed the rest of the evaluation, he could give Renee Carter one of his kidneys, and very likely give her back her life. Marcus stood in the apparatus bay, with the phone against his ear and the big red trucks gleaming under the lights. And he did not say anything for a moment, because 11 years ago he had carried this woman out of a building over his shoulder, and had never known if it mattered past that night, and now he was being told that he could carry her again, all the way out this time, into a life with her son. He said yes before the coordinator finished the sentence. He did not tell Renee right away. He wanted to be sure. He went through the evaluation, the scans and the blood and the long, careful interviews where they make certain a living donor is giving freely and is not being paid or pressured or fooled, and Marcus answered every question plainly, and the only thing that ever made his voice catch was when they asked him why. And he told them about a yellow sleeper with a duck on the front, and the room got quiet. He passed. And on a cold evening in the apartment on the 3rd floor, with Eli asleep on the sofa under the folded blanket, Marcus told Renee what he had done and what he could do. She did not believe him at first. Then she did believe him, and she said no. She said it the way she said no to everything, out of the deep certainty that she was not allowed to take this much from anyone, that a kidney was too far over the line of what one person could accept from another, that she would rather wait on the list and take her chances than carry the weight of his body inside hers for the rest of her life. And Marcus let her say it. He did not argue. He waited until she was done, and then he told her the one thing that broke it open. He said that 11 years ago, a wiser man would have stayed at the door of that apartment and let the fire have them, because the hall was gone and the floor was failing, and the book said, "Do not go." He said he went anyway. He said he had gone down that hall, not because the book allowed it, but because he could not stand at a door and listen to it. And he said this was the same hallway. He was not going to stand at the door of it. The decision was hers. He said it would always be hers, but she should make it knowing that he was not offering her a burden. He was asking her to let him finish, carrying out the thing he had started. 11 years ago, when she was a shape on the floor with her body curled around her baby. Renee put her face in her hands and wept without sound the way a person weeps when a child is sleeping in the room. And Marcus sat with her and did not touch her and did not fill the silence. And after a long time she lowered her hands and looked at the man who had pulled her son out of a fire, and she said yes. The surgery was scheduled for the spring. And this is the part where the story could have simply ended, with the gift given and the date set, except that the man in the glass office had not stopped reading. Curtis had spent weeks learning everything about Renee Carter. And his people had found the firefighter, and through the firefighter, quietly the rest of it. And on a morning in late winter, Curtis drove himself, without his assistant, to the Delaney Street firehouse and asked to speak to Marcus Bell. They sat in the small kitchen at the back of the station where the crews ate, and Curtis, who was not a man easily moved, told Marcus that he had read about the fire and the baby and the dialysis, and that he wanted to pay for everything. The surgery and the recovery, and the year after, all of it, through his foundation. No strings, no cameras unless they wanted them. Marcus thanked him, and said the firehouse had it handled, said it with the quiet stubbornness of a man who does not like to be rescued. And Curtis, hearing that, understood something about the firefighter that made him like the man even more. And he changed his approach. He did not push the money. Instead he asked, simply, if there was anything money could not fix that he could still help with. And Marcus was quiet for a moment, and then he reached into his jacket and took out a folded square of paper, gone soft at the creases, and he set it on the table between them. And he told Curtis to read it. Curtis unfolded the note a 6-year-old had written in pencil, and pressed so hard the letters nearly tore the page. He read that this was all the money he had. He read that his mom was sick, and the doctors needed more than they had. He read, "Please save her like you save people from fires, because I do not know who else to ask." And Curtis, who built wings on hospitals and put his family's name on them, who had buried his own mother after the long illness, and had spent the lonely back half of his life trying to make his money mean something, sat in a firehouse kitchen and could not speak. He folded the note as carefully as if it were glass. He asked Marcus how much was inside the pig. Marcus told him $11.40. Curtis nodded slowly. And then he asked Marcus a question that would change the shape of more lives than Renee Carter's. He asked how many other Renees there were in this city, how many people caught in the same circle, dying slow for lack of money in a place with more money than it knew what to do with, and whether a firefighter who would give his own kidney to a stranger he carried out of a fire 11 years ago might be willing to help him find them. The surgery happened on a Thursday in April. They wheeled them into adjacent rooms, the firefighter and the woman he had carried twice, and a surgeon moved a living kidney from one body to the other, and it took, and it worked. And within a day, Renee Carter's blood was being cleaned by an organ that had been freely given by the man who pulled her out of a fire when her son was a baby in a yellow sleeper. Ely waited in the family room with Tasha from the firehouse and the brass helmet keychain clutched in his fist, and when they told him his mother was going to be all right, that the operation had worked, that Big Marcus was fine too, the boy did not cheer. He went very still, the same still serious attention he had worn on the curb at dawn months earlier, and then he asked if he could see them, and they took him in, and he stood between the two beds with a hand on each, his mother on one side and the firefighter on the other, and he held them both. Renee Carter recovered slowly and then all at once, the way a person does when a thing that has been killing them is lifted off. By summer, she was off dialysis. By fall, she was back at the hospital, not cleaning rooms now, but working the patient assistance office. The very fund that had once been too far out of reach for her to ask about, helping other people fill out the forms she had been too proud and too tired to fill out herself, because Curtis had endowed 3 new positions in that office and had asked, as the only condition of the gift, that Renee Carter be offered the first one. The foundation built something that year, quietly, with no family name on it. It was a fund for the people caught in the circle, the ones too sick to work and too poor to wait, and Curtis asked Marcus to sit on the board, and Mark said yes on the condition that the fund's first grant go to a woman he would name, and it did, and her name was Renee Carter. Though she did not know for a long time that the firefighter had used his one request to put her at the front of a line again. Marcus went back to work 6 weeks after the surgery, the doctors clearing him to return to full duty, and the first day back his crew had hung a banner in the apparatus bay that he made them take down because it embarrassed him, and Tasha kept a photo of it anyway. He still drove Eli to school some mornings. He still let the boy wear the keychain. The pig sat on a shelf in the Carter apartment, washed and whole, the $11.40 still inside it, because Renee would not spend it and Eli would not either, and it became the thing they pointed to when people asked how all of this had started. A year after the dawn, when a small boy set a piggy bank on a stranger's porch, Renee Carter stood in the doorway of a new apartment, a real one, with a working elevator and a bedroom for Eli and a window that got the afternoon light, and she watched her son carry the pink ceramic pig in both arms the way he'd carried it 9 blocks the morning he decided to save her. He set it on the new shelf, in the new light, and he stepped back to make sure it was straight. Marcus stood in the doorway behind her, off shift, the brass helmet keychain in his pocket, and Renee did not turn around. She just reached back and found his hand, and the 3 of them looked at the small pink pig that had held everything a boy owned, and had turned out to hold something none of them could have. Counted. Eli asked his mother if they were keeping the money in it forever. Renee said yes. He asked why if they did not need it anymore. And Renee was quiet, and then she said that some money is not for spending. Some money is for remembering, and that as long as that pig sat on that shelf with $11.40 inside it, they would never forget that the smallest thing a person owns, given away because they have no other plan, can be the thing that saves a life. If you have ever given the last of what you had to someone who needed it more, tell me about it, because the people who do that quietly are the ones this story is for. And if this reached you tonight, there is another waiting, about a nurse who worked a double every Christmas Eve for 9 years and never knew who was watching. The pig is still on the shelf. It still holds $11.40. And on a high shelf in a closet in that same apartment, in a box that no longer has to stay hidden, there is a yellow sleeper with a duck worn nearly off the front, kept all these years by a woman who never knew the name of the man who carried her. Baby out of the fire, until the morning her baby went and found him.